This is fresh, local, wildflower honey. And this is Blackberry Mead. Today, we're going to turn the honey into the mead. Hello, welcome to English Country Life. Welcome to the kitchen on a cold, frosty winter's day. Perfect day for doing some inside jobs, and this is one of our most requested videos. A lot of people have asked to learn about mead making. It's something we've been doing for 25 years, so here we are. Today we're going to make Blackberry Mead. Actually, properly, that's called Blackberry Melomel, because Melomel is the term for a fruit mead, metheglin is the term for a spiced mead. I'm just going to call them mead, it's much easier to understand. For anyone who doesn't know, a mead is an alcoholic drink made by fermenting honey. Very traditional, dates back centuries and centuries in the UK, long before we had our own wine industry, long before we had a sugar industry. Fermented honey was one of the sort of most available drinks, and it can occur naturally if you extract honey and it's got slightly high water content. It can start to ferment naturally, and I suspect in sort of ancient times that's where it came from. Now it is available commercially, but not that widely, and it's very expensive, and honestly, when I've tried a lot of the commercial meads, they're not nearly as good as homemade meads. So this is one of the drinks that's really going to pay off if you put some effort into it and make it yourself. One thing I'm going to say is it is quite a time-consuming process. So it's nothing to be afraid of, it's nothing that you can't manage, but the one thing I would say is get yourself good quality ingredients, particularly the honey. Any honey will ferment, any honey will produce an alcoholic output, but if you get a really nice honey, you get a really nice mead, and if you're going to put all that effort in, what you really want is a really nice mead. So I'm going to break this video down into a day-by-day approach. I find it easier for people to brew along with the video that way. So we're on day one. And on day one, we're going to start the fermentation in a white lidded plastic bucket, not in a demijohn. The reason for that is that the initial fermentation can be quite violent. It can cause froth and foam, and that can force its way through the airlock and sort of mess up your fermentation, not to mention messing up your floor. So starting it off in a plastic bucket makes sense. You need to sterilise the plastic bucket. The cheap and easy way is an egg cup full of plain unscented household bleach, fill it with water, leave it 15 minutes, rinse it twice. If you prefer, there are proper proprietary sterilising agents available for homebrewing. You can get them from your local homebrew shop. Whichever method you prefer, do make sure that you get your bucket sterile. Let's get on with our ingredients. I'm gonna make a full recipe available in the description down below, so don't worry about trying to write everything down. What we are going to start with though is 2 kilograms of blackberries, and I'm using frozen blackberries that we picked from our fruit cage earlier in the year. And each of these boxes, when they're picked, holds a kilo of blackberries, and they've been frozen, and I defrosted them last night. I'm often asked, is frozen fruit okay for winemaking? Not only is it okay, it's often better than fresh. If you look in here, you can see there's lots of juice come out, because when you freeze the blackberries, they expand, that bursts the cell wall. When you defrost them, they release a lot of the juice, and it's releasing the juice is exactly what we need for winemaking. So frozen fruit, absolutely great. Let's get these into the bucket. On top of the blackberries, I'm putting 250 grams of just ordinary white granulated sugar. The purpose of the sugar isn't to make it sweet. The purpose of the sugar is to draw out that juice. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a potato masher and really squish all those fruits into the sugar and the sugar into the fruits, break up the structure of those blackberries and really get some juice flowing. And the combination of the sugar and the mashing is going to get all of that blackberry flavour into the honey. Next job, we're going to get the zest off a lemon. Then we're going to get the juice of that lemon. Once the sugar draws the juice out of those blackberries, and I'll leave that for about an hour, we're going to get on with the honey. What we need is 1.5 kilos of really good quality honey. And our great friend Andy has produced this for us. So this is 1.5 kilos. It's a wonderful semi-set honey. And it was produced when the bees were working field beans, but they were also on lime flowers, which is the linden tree. Wonderful flowers. Interestingly, lime flowers have an almost soporific effect if you make a tea from them. So I'm wondering whether this will make me nice and relaxed when it's actually brewed into a mead. Probably not so much. They were also on rose bay willow herb. And that is the difference when you deal with a real beekeeper. They can tell you where the honey came from, what kind of flowers the bees were on, and it makes an enormous difference to the honey. Honestly, if you try, for example, heather honey, it's wildly different than lots of other forms of honey. Very stiff, very hard set, quite flavourful, and it makes a real difference to your mead. So it's great to know what kind of honey you're working with, and if you get an outstanding mead, then use that kind of honey again. So we're going to take our 1.5 kilos of honey, we're going to put it in a pan, and we're going to put in 2 litres of water. Bring it to the boil it for about 20 minutes and skim off any foam, because real honey has other things in it. It has tiny amounts of beeswax and pollen, and we want to get all of those out in order to create a beautifully clear mead at the end of the process. It's important to pour that hot honey and water mixture while it's still hot onto the fruit, because that heat helps again with drawing out all those wonderful, dark, rich blackberry flavours that we're going to enjoy in the final finished mead. Once it's cool, I'm going to add 2 more things. I'm going to add one of these. These are little tablets called pectin tablets, and I'm going to crush it, mix it in. What does that do? Well, what it does is it kills off any wild yeast that's present either on the blackberries or in the honey, because wild yeast can ferment unpredictably, is probably the best way of putting it. They might not ferment very well, they might create slightly strange flavours, and getting rid of them lets us put in a controlled yeast that we know is going to work brilliantly to produce mead. Second thing I'm going to put in is a teaspoon of this. This is pectylase or pectic enzyme. Pectin is long strands of apparently polysaccharide fibres found in plant balls. I don't know what any of that means, but what it is, it's the stuff that clumps together and makes your jam set. And if you get it in wine, it can make your wine cloudy. But a teaspoon of this left for 24 hours will break it all down and avoid any risk of that cloudiness. So once the wine's cool, we'll put those 2 things in. We'll leave it for 24 hours and then, and only then, we'll begin the fermentation. Here we are, it's day 2. So overnight, the pectic enzyme's broken down any pectin that might have caused haze or cloudiness in our finished mead. Pectin tablets killed off any wild yeast, so there's nothing in there that's going to cause fermentation now. So we're ready to start our primary fermentation. And in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a yeast starter culture. And in a glass of room temperature orange juice, I'm going to introduce my yeast. I'm going to let it rehydrate, begin to ferment, which you'll see it bubbling and you'll see it starting to get going. And then we introduce all of that into the mead. And that way it'll get off to a flying start. Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce some tannin into the mead. Tannin is found in tea, it's found in grape skins and in wine. And it's that thing that gives you that sort of thick feeling, and it slightly coats your teeth. Now, honey doesn't naturally have any tannin in it, and that lack can make mead feel a little bit thin when you drink it. And if we introduce some tannin, it just counteracts that. Now, I'm going to use a small amount of grape tannin, which you can buy from homebrew shops. It's in a powdered form. If you haven't got any of that, you don't want to buy it, 2 or 3 tablespoons of strong black tea will do exactly the same job. And the third thing I'm going to do is get my mead warm, because yeast needs warmth to work effectively. If it's cold, it either stops working or it can even develop off flavours. So we want to keep it warm to get this fermentation going. And I'm going to use a heat pad to ensure that it's kept warm during the fermentation process. And I'll show those to you. Let's get going. Let's talk yeast starter culture then. I've got a glass of room temperature orange juice with a little bit of headspace. and I've got a sachet of specialist mead yeast. I'm going to suggest that when you make mead, use specialist mead yeast. You can get away with a general purpose wine yeast, but it's not ideal. I buy specialist mead yeast from a place called Crossmyloof Brew, which is in Glasgow. Crossmyloof is an area of Glasgow. I didn't know what the word meant when I first heard it. Apparently in Old Scots it means cross my palm, as in cross my palm with silver. But Crossmyloof Brew, great place, and they sell lots and lots of individual yeasts. I pay full price, not sponsored by them, but I really like them. So this sachet has yeast nutrient added to it, and for mead, particularly straight mead, you're going to need yeast nutrient. Honey doesn't have all the nutrients that your yeast needs. With fruit meads, you might get away with it, but I wouldn't chance it. So with all meads, I would suggest either buy a sachet that includes yeast nutrient, or if you're buying a more general purpose yeast, add a teaspoon of yeast nutrient to your starter culture. All I'm going to do is open the sachet, pour it into the orange juice, give it a stir, wait 10 or 20 minutes. When it gets bubbly, I know it's activated, and we'll add it to the mead. Take a look at that. Can you see the head on that? So now we know our yeast is awake and it's working, and it is time to pitch the yeast into our mead must. So I'm going to give it a stir, just to stir down that head. And here we go, into the mead. That's all we need to do. This is our grape tannin. It's a sort of mid-brown powder, and a little goes a long way. So I'm just using 1/8 of a teaspoon of this, and I'll sprinkle it into the mead, or rather drop it in a compressed lump, and then I'll give it a stir to break it up. And that will dissolve into the liquid and just give us that lovely mouthfeel. Let's talk about creating a good environment then for the fermentation. This is what I use. You can see it is very old, it is stained, it's probably over 20 years old. This is a heat pad. And what I do with that is it just gives off a very gentle heat, and I will put my brewing vessels on top of it, and it'll keep them at a nice consistent temperature. I'll tuck them away in the dining room or somewhere like that, out of the way, but in a warm indoors place. You can also get things like heat belts. If you don't want to use any artificial heating, then try to keep your mead in a warm place. So, you know, in the living room, in somewhere that doesn't get cold like an outbuilding or a utility room. Keep it as stable a temperature as possible, and you'll pay dividends in the quality of your brew. That yeast start culture's had 24 hours in the mead now, and the fermentation's really kicked in. Now, when you're fermenting on fruit, what happens is the gas bubbles form in the liquid, and they sort of get underneath the fruit and lift all the pulp to the surface. So you don't see quite the same sort of froth as you would with other liquids, but if you can hear it, you get a sort of Rice Krispie snap, crackle, pop sound as all those little bubbles are bursting continuously. We'll give that a few days just to calm down. Then we'll filter the mead off the fruit, get it into a demijohn, and let it complete its secondary fermentation. We've fermented now for several days in the bucket. It hasn't been that violent fermentation, partly because the temperature's quite cool, partly because the mead itself actually takes a long time to ferment, because honey has complex sugars that take yeast longer to break down. But it's been kept up to a good enough temperature by using that heat pad, and we're absolutely fine. It's now not going to foam over. The next step then is to get the fruit out of the mead. And the way I do that is take a clean sterilised demijohn, put a big funnel in it, and then rest a fine sieve on top of that, and using a ladle I'll transfer all the liquid from the bucket into the demijohn. Now when I've done that, I'm going to take a second sterilised demijohn, I'm going to move the funnel into the empty demijohn, put the sieve on top, and then I'm going to put some fine cloth, cheesecloth or muslin, on top of the sieve, and I'm going to pour the liquid into the second demijohn, and that extra filtration process will get rid of any fine particles. And don't try and do it in one step, because if you do it in one step, what happens is you just block the cloth. You will notice that my demijohn is not quite full, and I'll do that deliberately. I'll put about 80% of the liquid in the primary ferment that I think I'm going to need, and I'll top it up now after I filter it off. Because I put it all in at the beginning, I'm guessing a little bit. The berries are going to give up some liquid. We're never entirely sure quite how much liquid to add. So I prefer to put just under the amount I think I'm going to need and top it up at this stage so I get that demijohn exactly right without having too much liquid that I might have to throw away. The second thing that I'm going to do is put an airlock in, but I'm not going to put water in the airlock because this is going to be a long ferment. It's going to take 3 to 6 months to finish this ferment, and I'm going to put vegetable glycerin in the airlock because that doesn't evaporate the way that water does, so there's much less chance of that airlock going dry and a vinegar fly getting in. And the third thing I'm going to do is try and preserve that beautifully rich purple colour, and over that length of time there's a good chance that sunlight could bleach it out. So what I'm going to do is wrap the demijohn in brown paper just to prevent sunlight getting in and lightening that lovely purple colour to a sort of pinkish hue. All I'm going to do now is move that demijohn back on the heat pad and I'll let it ferment, and I'm going to leave it there for about 3 months because mead ferments much more slowly than a lot of other country wines. After 3 months, what I'll do is I'll rack it off into a clean, sterilised secondary demijohn, leaving any sediment behind. Racking off just means siphoning. Put it back to fermenting till I'm absolutely confident that all that honey has fermented out, turned itself into alcohol. And it is quite a long job with mead, but it's well worth it. I will do a part 2 video that shows the process of racking off, of clearing, of filtering and bottling to produce an absolute top range product. But if you want to know how to do that, I'll put a link up above, and that actually is a different kind of country wine, but the process of clearing and bottling is more or less the same. If you've enjoyed today's video, can you spare us 5 seconds? Give us a thumbs up down below. If you want to know more about mead making, please leave us a comment, or indeed any other aspect of country living. Tell us what you want to see and we'll try and make those videos for you. That's where this video came from, and it's been a long time coming. I'm sorry for that, but I'm going to make 2 different mead recipes to make up for my slowness. And if you want to see those videos and everything else we produce, click on subscribe down there, hit the bell next to it. It's a totally free service, but you get to hear every time we upload a new video. For today, thanks for joining us. Come back and see us soon. Take care.